Grow CFO is where finance leaders grow together. Join thousands of like-minded professionals using Grow CFO to access the combined knowledge and experience of the finance leader community. You can join us today, growcfo.net.
Hello, and welcome to the Grow CFO Show. I'm your host, Kevin Appleby, and today I'm with Jay Majeske. And Jay is a CFO of some experience, a CFO that worked in the fractional space, but a CFO that's doing some very interesting things today. So, Jay, tell me about yourself and your organization.
Thanks, Kevin. Really excited to be on Grow CFO Show. Love the work and the education you guys are putting out. It's really fantastic. So I kind of grew up in banking originally and then left to be a CFO of one of my clients. They're private equity backed, and so got a little bit of experience in that industry. And after an exit, I doubled down on wanting to do more CFO work. So I worked with a number of different firms doing interim and fractional CFO work, mostly post-acquisition in the private equity space. And while working in that space, I discovered a problem, especially in the fractional environment, but really across all engagements. My clients needed more of me than I had time to give, and certainly more than what they wanted to pay for. And which naturally leads us to think about how do we leverage excellence and how do we leverage people inside of engagements. And the firms that I worked with, basically what they would do is they kept hiring people who looked a lot like me, bookkeepers, accountants, MBAs, to handle the different pillars of finance and accounting. And I just kept thinking, there's got to be a better way to do this, a way to create more operational efficiency than what I'm able to achieve in my engagements today.
Yeah, so that's an exciting opportunity to think about that. So, Jay, tell me then, what's the solution if you're not going to hire more people that look like you?
Yeah, and I think this has been proven out over time. Diversity is a good thing, especially diversity of thought and of skills. And so what I experimented with was first, maybe I could hire people who looked like me, accountants, and teach them technical skills to complement my work. And that experiment went kind of okay. And then I went a different direction and I started hiring full stack developers, people coming out of technical training programs, and teaching them accounting and finance. And that was game changing. That really changed how I did my work and how these companies operated. The ability to leverage and develop with best in practice tools was transformational on my engagements. And I thought, man, I really have something here.
So, Jay, people coming out of college with full stack experience. So these are developer type folk who have no accounting training whatsoever. So
that's right.
So how do you turn those people into useful individuals in the financial world?
So I think one thing that we do different than maybe some organizations today is we really lean heavily into training and development. We take on the responsibility for developing people ourselves. And it turns out that people who have this really applied mathematical mindset take to accounting quite quickly. And for example, if you were to break down the accounting equation and say debits are positive, credits are negative, and your whole model is going to check sum to zero using language they're familiar with, they basically got the accounting equation in under an hour, and they know how to make it work. And so really, it's about teaching them the principles, revenue recognition. There's 7 principles in accounting that if they understand these principles really well, then maybe the specific applications of ASC 606 get a little complicated, but they really don't need to know it at that level of granularity because they understand really the foundational skills. And oftentimes understanding those, they can outpace people inside of organizations because they're using a more concept-driven approach to accounting.
Okay, so you're taking these folk, you're skilling them up. How then do you use them to complement what you're doing?
So the journey of leaving as being the CFO to helping other CFOs in their journey, there's so many things going on that a CFO needs to be competent in. And as technology changes, now that adds one more. We've been pioneering a concept that in the future, you might call people CFIOs, that the finance and information becomes so tightly intertwined that you need to have that. But on top of that, you need to be a storyteller. You need to be a good manager. It's exhausting, the list of the things that CFO needs to do well. So imagine you have a partner, someone who speaks your language, who can help you with data culture, governance, and has the competencies to actually implement your creative thinking. We think that people need to be arm in arm with these really competent people who can actually use data models, who can take Power Query and make it do what you want it to do, supported by the tools that are existing in your existing stack. That's where it gets really powerful, is when you have people who speak your language, who can talk debits and credits, but know how to do micro automation and data governance, do those things really well and bring that inside your organization.
Brilliant. So you're talking primarily then using these full stack developers to do FP&A type roles?
Yeah. In fact, we find them embedded throughout the organization. FP&A is an area where they really skill well because there's a lot of data competency that goes into that. And with AI tools and other things that are evolving, the speed with which you can now produce in that space is accelerating. And so they're really exciting in the FP&A stack. The other side where we see them really exciting is in the governance side. A lot of people have legacy ERPs. Imagine if instead of at the end of the month, you're testing your trial balance, what if you had a script running behind the scenes? And if your inventory detailed ledger ever mismatches, it's telling you that night and pointing out which transaction it happened in. That's saving days worth of work on a month-end close.
So are you talking here about effectively bespoking solutions for individual clients?
Yeah, and that I think is the trend that we're going to see. Monolithic applications, I think, are going to be devalued over time as the cost of code is dramatically dropping. We can now code bespoke solutions in days, what used to take months. And so that is really exciting, but also kind of scary. And how do we make sure that we have the people and processes and culture in place to be able to do that well? We think being able to have cross competency within your finance and accounting organization is a critical component of that.
Now, I'm curious here to say that you've experimented trying to get the folks that look like you and I, the bookkeepers, the financial controllers, and so on, to try and do the more techie stuff without much success. But then you've managed to get the techie people to do the finance stuff quite successfully. Now, what do you think it is about the likes of you and I that's holding us back?
So I think one thing that is difficult is just the pace of change. And so oftentimes people who lean towards into technology are kind of naturally mindseted towards being early adopters. They have a voracious appetite. And that's not to say accounting and finance people can't learn this stuff. Otherwise, I would have no role in this process. But breaking down our mental models about how we do our work is very difficult. The other problem is we're so busy producing, it's hard to find the time to reskill. And it's 18 months of dedicated study to develop the skills that people are coming in with out of these programs. And a lot of us has struggled to find that time to really reskill and get the experience and the training. It's not just a kind of a nudge skill. It really is some foundational principles you have to understand to do it well.
Okay, so that's really interesting that we're saying that one of the blockers for you and I taking on these skills is just the sheer learning time and intensity. So, Jay, moving forward, is there not therefore a risk that these folks that are coming out of college with those skills, with this real understanding of AI, what's going on at the leading edge, what's possible, are they going to complement us and help us in the long run, or are they going to take over from us?
Yeah, so I think it's a complementary in the long run. And the question organizations have is, are they going to be able to change the culture inside their accounting and finance teams to be a data-driven, automation-first culture? And leaders who are successfully able to make that change are going to be in high demand because it's difficult to do. And having people who can help you on that journey are really important. There are still competencies that traditional finance and accounting people bring to the table that are complementary. One of the things that I see in AI projects right now, people are really excited about what AI can do, but they make this sort of failing assumption that the ERP is a good source of truth. Whereas we know we can barely take a snapshot at the end of the month and hope that the balance sheet is good for that like one moment in time. And so these competencies around audit, around creating good data are only going to become more and more valuable over time because as things start sucking data out and spitting out analysis, not only do you have crap in, crap out, but now the crap out is really well written and very convincing to fool you.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
I think the accounting profession stays very relevant, but they need complementary skills helping them out.
Yeah. Which means that having folk that don't necessarily get bogged down in the data side of this, but have the overview, the ability to say, does what this system's telling me look sensible?
Yeah, the classic BS test.
The classic skills that you and I would probably have are still therefore very valuable at keeping control over this, keeping the sort of watchful human aspect on it.
Yeah, so people who know their business very, very well, who can spot things that seem off and know how to dig into those and verify that, the outputs are correct. I remember early days, we did a lot of Power BI dashboards. We still do a lot of Power BI dashboards. And people would feel very uncomfortable because it's just a number on the screen. They can't click on the cell and see where it comes from. And if they feel that way about Power BI, these agentic agents are only that times 100. So how do you convince people that what they're seeing is actually true? Classical accounting is great at that.
Yeah. So if we've got all of these agents, a lot of them bespoked, rather than big software implementations, does that mean that if I go and talk to an FP&A software vendor, they'll tell me that their biggest competition is Excel? Does the approach that you're taking still give Excel and Power BI, we've already mentioned, still a major place in the finance toolkit?
Yeah, a while ago you had Richard Nero on your show, and he talked about those who ignore Excel automation are falling behind. And I think he's spot on. I think Excel becomes more important in the future as a platform rather than less, because it's just has this large adoption, and what you can do with it, if you can write a little bit of Python and you're connected to an agent and with the Power Query and the other structures that are in it, is blow past the off-the-shelf tools with very little effort. So I think Excel becomes even more relevant and much harder to compete with, because it's already hard to compete with and people are only using 10% of it.
Yeah. So how do you move then if you're still relying on Excel and Power BI to do a lot of stuff, but you've got some agents around? How then do you ensure you've got one source of the truth?
So I think data models become really important. Sometimes we hear about data lakes or data warehouses, but where you're storing the data and how it's structured becomes really important. And thinking through those things carefully, really that's what unlocks automation across the board. And it's more complicated than maybe a layperson assumes, because ERPs by themselves are usually a starting point, and then you're doing adjustments and a lot of things on top of that. Plus you have CRMs, you have so much data all over the place. Thinking through a process of how do we start with good information is really a challenge.
So what sort of tools then typically would you use for that centralized data repository?
So in the lower middle market, we do love the Power BI stack, the agents that it has in its models. And the reason we tend to lean into Microsoft aren't because its technology is any better. It's because the licensing is pretty widely adopted and it integrates well with itself. And so since Excel is already the dominant tool, we like leaning into that tool stack. That being said, the cost of code is becoming so cheap that things like Power Apps, for example, are becoming less relevant, but Power Automate, Power Query, Fabric, those tools are still a great place for consolidating data. If you need more, you can go to a warehouse, but most companies don't need to go to that level.
My mind just keeps getting blown by the way you can effectively write some code to do stuff without knowing how to code these days. No, you just seem to need to ask ChatGPT or Copilot, and it comes up with all of the appropriate stuff. And in my experience, 80% it works first time to do what you want. That's just unbelievable.
Yeah, I think that 80% is about right. And so if you can take that 80% and pair it with someone who can clean up the edges, then you really are off to the races. Where the models fall down today is where it's 80% of the way there, and now you're trying to convince it to get to the last 20%, and it will keep embedding the same mistake over and over again, no matter how much times you tell it it's wrong. So if you can get over that last 20%, man, the speed with which you can innovate is really incredible.
So, Jay, great learning about all this stuff? How do you take it to market?
Yeah, so closing that last mile is really something that we're excited about. I see in this spaces there are thought leaders who are just doing tremendous work, and CFOs are really interested and they're picking it up, but they don't know how to say, how do I actually implement this in my organization in a meaningful way? How do I turn all these neat things into actionable things? And we think you need to partner with someone who's going to get to know your business very, very well and who's going to be part of your team. And it starts like, it's fun to see what cool tools can do, but if you don't have a culture that is favoring adoption, that is interested in curiosity, that gives time for learning, I think the culture piece is really where transformational change in organizations begin. And you need to identify someone in your organization who's going to be the culture change hero. And if you don't have someone who can do that, who can really be excited and show people how to do things, then you need to bring that in from the outside. Because without it, you end up throwing things over to IT. They kind of push things back. The person who's been doing it for 10 years can't really figure it out, or they run into a problem. They create shadow processes around it. And it's why 80% of these sort of automation projects fail, is because they have good requirements, but the culture isn't really established to sustain them in the long term.
So what is that piece of magic dust that you bring to sustain that culture?
So I think one thing that really helps with culture is to bring people in who bring the culture with them, who can be excited about it, who understand the tools, who can ask questions, and can make things less scary. Someone who can be there saying, hey, I want to try out this prompt for the first time and see if I can write a bit of code. And if they write something and they have someone there who can say, yeah, this is you did really awesome. And here, let's change these 5 things. And now you can use it. And let me help you implement it. Like, you need that people side, those communication skills are really the last mile. And it's something that the technology stack itself won't provide.
So what does an engagement look like for you? Is this you come in, you do some stuff and you go out again, or is it a much longer term relationship?
Yeah, a typical engagement often starts with a burning problem. We need to get our close done in 5 days. We need to know how margin expansion is affecting our business. We need to grow organically, and we need a dashboard that shows where sales trends are going. It usually starts with a problem, and we come in to help them solve a very specific problem. But then, in order to solve that problem, we have to build a data model in order to solve it well. And now that we have the data model built, it starts to become really interesting, the things that they didn't know that they could do. And like an onion, it starts to peel back over time. Their original problem gets put to bed, but they realize that they have so many more uses for data modeling and automation that we end up doing more and more and more with them, and end up working quite long term on engagements because there's just so much value that can be brought to the table.
So you've very much stepped away then from the fractional CFO work into possibly helping a full-time CFO and the CFO's team in the client.
So I work primarily with CFOs, the office of the CFO, and with fractional CFOs. If I'm a fractional CFO, the same problem applies, right? How do I go in and do more? How do I bring more value without having to be the one to do everything? So we pair with those fractional CFOs or with those interim CFOs to help them get more out of their existing infrastructure. And it's pretty exciting. It's really neat when you see someone kind of catch the bug for the first time. They're a little skeptical, and then they see something working and they're like, well, what else can I do? It's like a kid in a candy shop. And oftentimes we're like, well, we got to work this kind of systematically and one thing at a time after you have your first big success in this space.
So what typical size of client do you deal with?
So most of our clients are under 100 million in revenue. So we're working in the lower middle market space with a lot of people who have legacy ERP systems. They might be on-premise, they might be on cloud. They just have really interesting stacks. And the reason why I love this working in that space is because you can affect change more quickly and you can really be agile. And I think it's the perfect place to experiment with what the future of accounting and finance is going to look like, because you can implement best practices quicker and test them out and get that feedback. So I think the under 100 million space is a really exciting space. If I'm a CFO, that's where I love to be because I can affect change so well there.
Under 100 million at the top end, over how many million at the bottom end?
So usually they're over 2 million, but oftentimes...
That's more, really?
Yeah, quite small. And people who are in that startup stage, they love the idea of not having to build this legacy team in the first place. How can I partner with someone who can help me. I'm building out my business. I'm in a high growth business. Those are typically the ones with the smaller revenue. They might not have revenue, but they have aspirations to be bigger. And they want to have leverage and great reporting from day one because they're dealing with investors and pitch decks and they're doing all this stuff. And that credibility is currency for them. And so it's really worthwhile for them to invest in capabilities early.
So, Jay, we talked about faster close. Presumably this service that you're bringing along impacts in many more spaces. Planning, budgeting, forecasting?
Yes, absolutely. So we work a lot in the private equity space where the roll-up strategy is very dominant. And so you're acquiring a lot of different companies with a lot of different systems. How are you going to create a 3-statement financial model with drivers that actually works and doesn't spend a lot of time? That's probably our most popular product. If we had a product, would be financial statement consolidation across disparate systems. And being able to do that and being able to create workbooks that don't have a single sum if or X lookup in them, that it's mind-blowing to people. I can't remember the last time I wrote a match statement. I just don't need it with Power Query.
Okay. Gosh, we're seeing today an insight into the future, I believe. So, Jay, what does FinTech in general look like, say, 12, 18 months from now?
So I think in 12 to 18 months, we're going to see the software companies have realized that standalone developers can eat their lunch. But what they do very well is create structured processes that other people can follow without having to design them themselves. And oftentimes that's what we're really shopping for when we're going to buy a product. I don't want to have to think through the complexities of everything. I want someone who's solved the process for me and has a good workflow. And so software companies that are process oriented and solve workflow problems are going to be the winners because the technology side is going to be democratized and become a commodity, but process execution is still going to be very valuable.
Yeah. I think something that we've really got to solve is the people and process side to the whole equation. The system side, we're going to have some great tools, but I ask myself questions like 20 years ago, I was working in PwC Consulting in a business that was talking about implementing rolling forecasts instead of traditional annual budgets, was talking about implementing the fast day zero close. 20 plus years on, I can still probably cite the same examples of the companies that we did then that were doing it, because none of it has ever really gained legs and taken off in any sort of way. And I can only put it down to, well, there's more than technology at play here. There's people and there's process to get right. So what you're saying there about people that can design the workflow really resonates with me.
Yeah, I think what you just said is really, really insightful. It's almost like flying cars or self-driving cars. We see incredible progress towards a goal, but the last mile turns out to be a lot trickier than we assume it to be. And I think that we're still going to continue to experience that. If I were to think back in time, I would say we're kind of like the year 2000 with the internet. Good thought leaders could see that it's going to just have a tremendous impact on retail, but it took 20 years for Amazon to really become the behemoth that it is. I think we're going to see the same thing with emerging technologies today, that their transformational power has not been overstated. If anything, they're understated, but the timeline of which they're going to affect that change has been overstated. And that the need for us to take the time to build competencies and to learn how to use it well, I think is going to take some time.
So your original case for this, Jay, was to say that, hang on a minute, the clients are wanting me to do more than I can do as a CFO. How do I manage to increase the output without a substantial cost that the client can't afford? So bring that forward. What's this potentially then going to do to the job market, do you think? Are we going to be in the threat of loads and loads of jobs disappearing? Or do you think that's a myth?
I think that's a myth. I think we assume that because we assume the jobs in the future are going to look like they did today, which are very production oriented. And if the production goes away, what are people going to do? Particularly in the FP&A space, we see that particular job kind of forking, and people are going to either need to have competencies around rapid technological innovation, creating the automations, the workflows, the scopes, or we see people going a researcher route where they're going to need to really dig deeply and think thoughtfully about real business problems. Today, we're just like losing ourselves to get the board deck out in time. And as soon as we get one out, we're like into production mode for the next one. And we're using kind of these highlight bullet points. Imagine instead of being in that constant rat race, if I have an FP&A expert who is doing a deep dive into margin erosion in this particular product line and spend a month coming up with really good research and insightful commentary around that particular issue. Well, that's going to create tremendous value in the organization. And companies that don't do that are going to get left behind. So there's going to be a race to hire even more people, and it's going to change the critical skills and the thought processes that are necessary. And we'll see a little bit of division of labor between tech competency and researchers, but it's only the production aspect that's really getting swallowed up in this, which is going to unlock people to do even more transformative, more valuable work.
Do you think that deep research bit is going to be replaced, though, by AI models that can almost do it for you?
No, I don't think that. For some of the reasons that we talked, I think they're going to be wonderfully assistive, but the models today push towards average values, average outcomes. They're going to be able to do baseline thinking that is really helpful, but they don't have the creativity to think about what's really the root problem here and to be able to ask the questions and to go after answers. I think they're going to support the research, but they're not going to replace human ingenuity and creativity. They're going to enable it.
Yeah. And as we speak, I'm finishing off this quarter's tech innovation report in Grow CFO, and that's involved a lot of deep research as to what's going on in the FP&A space at the moment. Now, ChatGPT has been invaluable in terms of asking it questions, and it's deep research mode to go off and find stuff, find research papers that other people have put out and tell me what they're saying. And I think, what am I doing effectively? And stuff really that if I was doing this back in the consulting space, I'd have probably had a couple of graduate trainees around and I'd be sending them off to do a week's research, where ChatGPT is doing that week's research for me in about 20 minutes.
Right.
So that is phenomenal. But there's still that thing that says, okay, we've got to take this research and we've got to turn it into a story and we've got to sift out the mistakes. And that's effectively the same job as you'd have had in the past, and it hasn't changed much because the graduates make mistakes and ChatGPT will make mistakes.
Right.
So I think you're right that it's a fantastic research assistant, but it doesn't replace the human thought.
Yeah, and it doesn't know what to prioritize, and it can't think of things that are new. And that is something that is very unique to the human model and very, very valuable. So it just means that we're less on the production side and more on the critical thinking, reasoning, creativity side.
So, Jay, if listeners have liked what they've heard today and love the things that you're talking about, how do they find out more?
Yeah, so they can visit our website, www.stalliant.com. They can find me on LinkedIn. I'm really passionate about discussing these things. So we do a lot of engagements, but I'm happy to enjoy conversations. If you want to have and think about how in my organization, I've learned a lot about it. I don't know how to get to that last mile of implementation. I need a partner to help me out. That's where we're having a lot of really great conversations with people today.
Yeah, that to me is the biggest problem. We're all learning loads of theory by listening to podcasts like this, turning up at webinars, watching demonstrations, but it's that practical. How do you do that last mile of implementation in your own organization, with your own people, overcoming all those idiosyncrasies, for want of a better word, in your organization that are going to get in the way of whatever you're doing? How do you do all that stuff? And I think, Jay, that's where you're coming up with something that's pretty unique here.
Yeah, we hope so. And we're having a lot of fun doing it. The market's responding, we're growing pretty quickly, and it's really enjoyable. It's fun to see organizations do things and be excited about change. And that's really rewarding.
Brilliant. Jay Majeske, thank you very much for being this week's guest on the Grow CFO Show.
Thanks, Kevin. Been absolutely fun to talk with you.